I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. This is the second part with our good friend Lee and Tom, and Brian isn't with us for this segment once again. So fellas, let's pick it up where we were before. I think we were talking about the skull that was left, that was, I don't know if you guys remember what we were talking about, but I think it had to do with missing people in that segment.
So, Tom, you want me to continue where I was?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So just around the end of World War II, or just after it, a fighter pilot went missing in the Crater Lake area. And a Crater Lake is a scary area. And I can tell you that from having gone there and looked around myself. And we'll talk a little more about that in a little bit. I got an idiot friend of mine that wants me to go back up there, but we'll talk about that later. But Crater Lake is a scary place and has been for a long time. So this fighter pilot, shortly, it was either at the end of World War II or right afterwards, crashed in a plane in the vicinity of Crater Lake, went missing. They found the plane eventually, nobody in it. In the some people hiking way off the normal beaten path found a skull with the jawbone still attached, sitting on top of a down tree, out in the middle of nowhere. So they went back and got authorities. You know, the whole ball of wax started. The authorities came out, found the skull. The skull was in exceptional shape. In fact, the guy that looked at the skull said that he didn't even think he would have to take x-rays to figure out the dental work, to figure out who this person, you know, who did this skull belong to. And they very shortly after figured out that it was this fighter pilot that went missing in the 40s, and this is in the early 70s. And the person that looked at the skull said they couldn't believe the condition that the skull was in, that it hadn't been out in the weather for all those years. This skull showed up just mysteriously on this log. Nobody knew how long it was there, but it hadn't been there the 30-something or almost 30 years. You know, and these strange things happen. And, you know, when you talk about missing people, this stuff like this happens from time to time. In fact, I was a few weeks ago keeping track of a missing girl in upstate Michigan. I lost track of it because I got focused on some other things. But this stuff happens from time to time. And, you know, the forest, well, I don't want to talk about different services or government agencies, but you can only do so much. When you have people missing in, you know, Northwest California, around Lake Shasta, around Crater Lake, around Mount Rainier. Remember the lady that went missing by St. Helens that was going on her, whatever, she's going to find her soul or whatever it is.
Yeah, the Vision Quest.
Walk.
Yeah, the Vision. That a little bit, go a little into detail on that story, just kind of refresh me.
Which one?
The gal on the Vision Quest. That's it.
Okay, so I'm going to have to skate around some things with this, but this lady, who probably wasn't the brightest bulb in the pack, was going to go off on this Vision Quest and, I don't know, find her soul, find whatever. She went out on a trek into the woods and was never seen again. And a short time later, they found some bones way up again on Mount St. Helens in this rocky area. And eventually, well, the first article that came out didn't determine that it was hers. Another one determined it was hers because of some of the stuff that they found, but they only found things like, the fingers, the hands, the bones of the feet. They didn't find, the femur and all of these big bones in the human body. They found small pieces, which is the same thing happened at Crater Lake, and the same thing happened with the bow hunter in Canada, probably arguably the greatest bow hunter that ever lived. Guy lived 90% of his life out in the wilderness, dealt with everything from tigers, Siberian tigers, to grizzly bears, to black bears. He trekked the world, was one of the greatest bow hunters that ever lived, Bart Schuyler. And he disappeared in mysterious circumstances. Now, this is a guy that's not going to be snuck up on by a bear or moose. And all they found was a few particles of clothing, some blood droplets, and this guy was gone. Literally, look him up, Bart Schuyler, one of the greatest, or if not the greatest bow hunter in the world. This guy was trained in being out in the wilderness, spent the majority of his time out in the wilderness alone, living off the land. He disappears. Bunch of cockamamie stories come up. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police tried to do, I could talk about them because it's a different country, tried to say that he got attacked by a grizzly. Well, anyone that's ever been around a grizzly or any kind of bear, they couldn't sneak up on a corpse. They're not quiet. They tromp through the woods because they think they're the biggest and baddest. They're not quiet at all. You can hear a bear coming long ways off before they even get to you. Clunk, 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 through the woods. And supposedly he was snuck up on by a grizzly bear that ate him. But they didn't find any of his stuff. They found some blood. They found some scat. And, of course, they had to come up with a story. Again, with probably the greatest bow hunter that ever lived. And they come up with this story to fit whatever. But everybody that was involved with that one even said the same thing. He wasn't snuck up on. This guy was literally lived in hostile environments the majority of his life. Now, could his number just have come up? Sure. But they didn't find anything to make it look like he was killed where he was at. So the grizzly was big enough to carry a full-grown muscular man off. And it's just, that's what I mean. The whole thing with people missing is you have to look at it where they're at. And as I said before, a lot of people that go missing want to. It's harder today because of fingerprints and facial recognition and all this stuff. To just disappear, you almost have to go to another country. You can't just stay here. But there's so many people that go missing, and I don't care the state. Kansas, Kentucky, California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, it doesn't matter. A large number of people go missing. A lot of them are transient people that may not know the area. So they're on vacation in Wyoming, and two people go trekking into the woods and don't come out. So who last saw them? Well, they know that they're at a hotel in, northern Colorado 2 days before. Or they were at a hotel in Kansas or Nebraska or something 2 days before. But it's hard to track down when transient people go missing. I'm not saying that's the majority of it. I'm saying that happens a lot. But when you look at these areas in these states, hunters, why do you think when we're talking about creek devils, and thank you for changing the name of your show, hate the other two words, creek devil, when you think about that, why are all the scariest stories hunters? And that reason is they're oftentimes alone, or they're, a couple 100 yards away from their buddies. They're usually, I could tell you right now, if I was a deer hunter, I wouldn't get in a tree stand to save my life. Never happened. Because a lot of these people that have had come to bad endings in the woods hunting have been in trees or in tree stands. Or they, do something. If you can't cycle a bolt action gun rather rapidly, I wouldn't shoot at one of these because, you know, most people that shoot 30-06 is what Will's favorite gun when he was young was what, 300 Savage? I think he used to shoot, Will.
That's what he used to hunt with, yeah.
Yeah. You know, that's a whomping gun. But when you're excited and you've seen something that you've never seen before and you're scared to death and you start trying to cycle, I don't care if it's a Remington 700 or a Model 70 or whatever gun, and shoot at something that's 3 times your size in height or weight, not necessarily height, but weight, and you're scared and don't get a square shot and you're stuck in a tree, that's why, you know, a lot of these hunter stories are scary. And a lot of them that have gone missing have been in trees. And even that so-called famous story from down in the South from whatever, the 70s or 80s, everybody always plays that story. It had this evil look. It was looking at me and all that. You know, he shot it at, but he tells everybody else to not shoot at it, right? And so he was in a tree stand. He was scared to death. When he felt he needed to shoot, see, that's what I mean. When you think about stories, I'm not saying that didn't happen. What's his name?
Mike Worley.
Well, yeah. When you hear his story, the first time, I could tell you a lot of that rings true with me. And the fact that he shot back at it because he was scared to death rings true to me. I've been so scared to death, I couldn't even tell you. But he tells people not to shoot at him now. And the funny thing is, it's like I told you, when you're around that lake with your buddy up in the Cascades and things are not right, when they don't feel right, you have to start, it becomes about survival. You have to do what you have to do. Now, like I said, number 25 on the list is shooting. You do everything else beforehand. And a lot of people don't know that. I see people in the Central Cascades, idiots, go in for camping overnight at some remote lake up in the woods that have no clue about what to do when they're in the woods. I've seen it, I don't know how many times. They have no tent, they have, not proper supplies. And you got to think about all those things if you're going to go out into the woods.
Yeah, that's very true. And I'm going to scratch the idea of camping alone, especially up in the Cascades.
I don't want to scare you away from that. It's where you go and how you do it. There's people that go up there by the droves all year long, all summer long, by themselves. There used to be a store, I'll name the city, Bend, Oregon, that used to have every Wednesday or every third Wednesday or every third Thursday, they would allow people to come in and sit around and talk about, backpacking into the remote country, going fishing at your favorite lake up in the high mountains and all of that. There's still people that do that all the time. The thing is, if you go up there and do that, you have to be in charge of you. A lot of these people, nothing ever happens to them their whole life. They never see or hear anything. I went to one of those meetings in Bend, and I heard some of the people talking. You know what? There was a lot of strange noises out there that night. But then it had gone up 25 other times and nothing happened. So if I was to take my daughter or anyone out into the woods right now, it would be under certain circumstances, and that would be armed and armed well and be prepared. I would have no problems taking my daughter out into the woods. I'm not afraid of the woods. I'm not now. I would go out there I have a fifth wheel, so maybe I should clarify that. I don't know if I'd be putting her in a pup tent in some of these areas I haven't been to in a long time, but I have no problems going out in the woods and taking her fishing or anything else. You can't be afraid of it. If you get afraid of it, then you lose that one beautiful thing that we have in this country is spending time out in nature.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I'm not going to. I like learning as much as I can about this, so I can learn how to either avoid or detour these things if something happens. What are your thoughts about the Pacific Crest Trail, the PCT? Because, you know, you do get a lot of people that are solo hikers, or they may be hiking in groups, but, you know, at the end of the day, you're just going to get a lot of people that are going to be camping alone. Have you heard anything in regards to...
I've met people, I've known people that have done it, and have gone through huge sections of it, you know, in the summer. And, you know, was talking about the guy, you know, people bike riding from Washington all the way down to Southern California on 101 or Highway 1.
Yeah.
I knew a guy that did that, you know, and he did it by himself, right? So you can do it. First thing is probably luck. Second thing is being prepared. And I've known people that have done the Pacific Crest Trail, and there's some of that have done it in California, Oregon, even further north into Washington, that have taken, you know, a month and walked as far as they could, right? And then come out of the woods, and I don't know, nowadays, I guess, you get an Uber driver to drive you back to the bus station or something, right? But there's nothing to be afraid of if you're prepared. And the thing is, when you're oblivious to your surroundings, and let me clarify this another way. Okay, so a couple years ago, I had read a lot of stuff about Crater Lake, and it has had a lot of weird stuff happen over years. I'm not just talking the last 5 or 10. I'm talking the last 125 years. Crater Lake has had weird stuff going on. So I was on my way from Oregon to California, and I left after, it was a Thursday afternoon. I left after my last bit at work. I got off early, about 1 o'clock, and I already had my stuff all packed. And so I put it in the truck, and I decided I'm going to go look at the south side of Crater Lake, where I've heard all of these stories, right? So I went down to Klamath Falls. There's a nice hotel in Klamath Falls I stay at all the time called Shiloh Inn. So I stayed there, slept a night, ate dinner, got up early in the morning, drove up to the south side of Crater Lake, found, I had a Forest Service map, and I found a Forest Service road that had access to one of these deep valleys on the southeast side, or south by southeast side of Crater Lake. And I thought, I'm going to go up and check it out for the day. And I had gotten snacks. There was a store close by, and I'd gotten snacks and, you know, my sealed snacks, 2 big bottles of water. I had some more water in the truck on ice and food on ice in the truck. I drove up there. I get up there about 9 something, 9:15, 9:30, whatever it was. And I found this parking area at the south side, literally the south by southeast side of Crater Lake. And so I got out, I grabbed my rifle, put my handgun in my holster, grabbed a couple of spare mags for my handgun, put them in the pockets of my jacket, put my backpack on, grabbed a bottle of water, and locked my truck, and off I went. And there was a semi-trail, half game trail, half human, you know, you could see where people had trumbled through the woods. And I walked for several hours. And around lunchtime, I stopped. I pulled out something to eat, and I ate my snacks and drank the rest of a bottle of water, put the empty bottle, crushed it, put it in my backpack. And I remember thinking how creepy it was up until that point. Now, it takes a lot to creep me out. I've been shot at. I have been in situations that I hope to God most people don't go through. And I was creeped out, and this was noon, or close to noon, whatever, 11:45 to 12:30, whatever it was, right? Midday. And I hadn't seen a squirrel or a chipmunk the entire time I've been walking. Now, gray squirrels in the area, as you know, Tom, gray squirrels will chatter when they see a human coming in, especially in the wilderness.
Yeah.
They'll get up high and they go, cha, 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 cha. Well, none of that. The only thing I saw were birds and bugs. Not a chipmunk one, not a squirrel one, nothing. And I'm paralleling this stream/river up this deep canyon. So I walked for another, hour and a half or two, and I'm pushing myself by this point. Will and I talked about this not very long ago. I was already kind of freaked out, but I kept going. And I get up about 2:30, walk for another 2.5. I didn't walk all that far because some of this there was no trail, but you could see where people and game trails were, and I tended to follow those because they tend to parallel a water source. I get about 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon. I don't know exactly what time. I didn't have a watch on, and my cell phone was in my backpack because it stopped working 4 hours ago. So I'm looking around. By this time, I have my rifle in my hand. I had my 30-30. And I'm looking around. I still haven't seen a chipmunk or squirrel. I hadn't seen anything on the ground. I only saw stuff that was flying. And I decided, you know what? It's 2:30 in the afternoon. It's getting late. I want to get back to my truck. So I can tell you, and I got back to my truck a lot faster than what it took me to get where I was at. And I don't even know how far I went up. And I got back to my truck. And by the time I got to my truck, I was thoroughly kind of freaked out. And I don't know why. I didn't see anything that would freak me out. I didn't hear anything that would freak me out, but I was freaked out. And I got back. I drove back to Shiloh Inn, rented basically the same room I was in the night before. Went into the bar, ate when I got back because I'd only been snacking all day, not had anything major to eat. I had a big, cheeseburger, fries, and a couple of drinks, and only then did I start to calm down. But it was like everything in that area instinctively for me was wrong. And I never saw a deer. I didn't see any animal walking on 4 legs or 2 that whole day. And it freaked me out. I have no problems admitting it. It freaked me out. I don't know what caused me to freak out. And it's one of those things where you can't put a finger on it, but I didn't even feel like I was being watched. It was weird. It just was, everything was wrong. Everything was wrong. Like I said, all I saw were birds. And I walked for 6.5, 7 hours. That's it. Birds.
Yeah, that is weird for that area. Do you think you were subconsciously picking up on the fact? Well, it sounds like you were very conscious of the fact that there were no squirrels.
Well, I remember I kept thinking I couldn't walk a block where I used to live up in Central Oregon without seeing a chipmunk or a squirrel. It just didn't happen. They're everywhere, I don't know if my mind got ahead of me. I don't know if there was some, people talk about infrasound and all that.
You took the words out of my mouth. That was my next question. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I know that animals can do it. I know certain animals can do it. They've proven it. Now, whether these things can, I know I've heard them scream and do things that no human could do or any other animal that I know. And I remember thinking, I just don't know. It shook me up. In fact, I told Will about it a while back. I'm never going back there. Well, what does Will do? Hey, let's go back to Crater Lake. I'm like, what? But in the end, he's right. I didn't see anything that caused me grief. I didn't hear anything that caused me grief. It was just the absence of certain things. Well, people always say whenever these things are around, you can hear a pin drop. Everything, that's bull too. Certain instances I've seen that, and there's certain instances where I've seen deer fleeing for their life, crashing through the woods because these things are on their way. So it's all that nonsense around that. Now, whether something got into my mind and it got the better of me, which may have happened, I'm not saying it didn't. I just can't put my finger on any one thing other than I didn't see anything with 4 legs that entire day.
Did you guys
Not till I was.
Did you ever go back there with Will and check it out?
Oh, absolutely not.
Oh, okay.
Will wants me to go up there sometime in the near future, and I'm still cursing him over that. But he's right.
Yeah.
You know, he said, you know, tell him what you told me.
Well, no pain, no gain. I mean, but see, I'm the kind of person you got to smack me in the head with evidence to show me that something is there. I mean, you can have all the peripheral stuff, but that has to lead to something more concrete.
Well, and Will's right about that. From noon on, I had been pushing myself because I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what. And to be honest, like I said, I never saw or heard anything to frighten me or scare me. And I wasn't scared that way. I was more nervous. It was a nervous thing, right? And I never saw or heard anything that would make me nervous, but I was still nervous. And as you know, you live in Oregon, to not see a chipmunk or a squirrel in 6.5 hours would freak you out, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and especially in Critter Lake. I mean, they're just everywhere. The chipmunks are just all over, and like you said, the gray squirrels are everywhere.
Yeah, see, that's what I mean. And so, you know, at lunchtime I was thinking about it, but when I got to 2:30, whatever time it was, and I started realizing the sun's going to be going down here in a couple of hours. I've walked, I don't know how far. You know, some of it was probably mental, but something else was going on that made me think that way. I don't know what it is. I had that feeling in the service a couple of times where I just felt like, you know, we really shouldn't be where we're at. And, you know, people always think, oh, yeah, that's all, you know, I'm not scared. You know, I've got my gun. I'm not scared. And I had my gun. But I just remember thinking I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I got out of there. So, you know, take it as you will.
I think the brain subconsciously can process data around us in a way that, you know, maybe sends warning signals, you know, stuff that we're not consciously aware of, but you were, you know, there's no squirrels, no chipmunks. That's a little bit weird. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just saying that you can be in those.
Well, no, and you're right, because after the first hour, you're like, what the hell? And then another hour, it's like, where are these? And like I said, not hearing the warning, the gray squirrels will warn 200 square acres that there's a person around. And I don't know, 1,000 times I've seen that with gray squirrels. So you're walking up and it maybe that was it, you know. I can't put my finger on it and try. All I know is at one point late in the afternoon, about 2.5 hours after going through the first spell of it, I just decided it was time to get out of there, and I got out of there. And I trucked my way out of there pretty quickly. It took less than a third of the time to get out. Now, it was all downhill, but still, I was trucking pretty good. And when I got to my truck, I still felt that way. So I don't know, you know, something in the brain, something. And I've been in some scary situations with these things. And this was not the top of the list, but it was pretty close considering I never saw or heard anything. That's the thing that still messes with me.
Hey, Will, what are your thoughts? Do you have any opinion on the infrasound theory?
Well, you know, I'd mentioned before we talked to our anthropologist friend John, and he said that, you know, science still knows so little about infrasound that it's certainly within the possibility of them having the ability to do that.
And see, the funny thing is, because humans can't hear it, they don't focus on it.
Yeah, we're sort of whatever's in front of our face, you know, we're just kind of, and we're getting lazier about things like that.
Yeah. It's the same thing like I've told people about how to record these things properly. Nobody listens. They all still, and so I don't, like I said, I don't offer any information like that anymore because.
I would like to hear it. How do you record these? What is a good way to record these things?
So I'll tell you in a general term on the recording here, and then I'll tell you some more later on.
Okay.
when you go to a Walmart or Office Depot or Best Buy or whatever you have in your neighborhood and buy a audio recorder, those are optimized for the human voice. Okay? So the human voice falls within certain parameters, and they have literally filters and compressors and all of this stuff to trap that human voice with as much quality as they can. Okay?
I hadn't thought about it, but that makes total sense. Yeah.
I told Will this, and I even tried to do it once a long time ago. I had and Will's got one of these, a flip video recorder. And I don't have mine anymore, burned up in a fire, but I had a flip video recorder which has Ultra HD, or had, and it has stereo recording, but it's outside the range of normal human voice, right? And I actually recorded a very loud rock concert one time, and it came across perfectly. Now, I tried to record it on an Olympus, and I can't remember the other type of digital recorder, and all I got was static. And why? Is because that rock concert was louder than the capability of the recording device, the Olympus recording device.
Yeah, it
was literally, it was just static and noise. You could hear the band every little bit, but it was mostly static and hissing and noise. And with these things, being able to scream, have you ever noticed if you find 3 recordings of screams, one from Texas, one from Oregon, one from Washington, on a recording device, they all sound the same.
Yeah.
They're all within the same range. That is the limited capability of the recording device that you're using. I don't know how many times I've talked about this, but people, they run to Walmart, buy one for $49, and I'm going to get into audio. And they get some stupid bionic ear and try to connect it up to it, and it still comes across with the same quality. That's because that's the limitations of the device, not of what you're doing. So if you actually hear one of these, I used to be a fan of the loudest rock and roll band in the world. I'd see them every time they come around. I've seen them dozens of times, 14, 16, 18 times, whatever it was. I tried to record one several times on improper equipment, and it would never come across. I get the right equipment, and it sounds crystal clear. And when you're out in the woods, and, when these people, I thought it was 500 yards away. Well, if you've ever heard one of these things scream up close, they are so loud, and it's so intense. What shows up on your recorder, and Will can chime in on this, the Puyallup Screamer, have you heard Will tell about how that was recorded?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, now we're talking, early 70s, so the tape recorders weren't real sophisticated, but this was recorded inside of a house with all the doors and windows were closed, and the creature was at least a quarter mile away, and it sounded like it was right outside the window.
Wow. So you need, Lee, what you're telling me, because I got a little bit of an audio background from 100 years ago, you need a 20 to 20 or even better frequency response for the equipment. Is that what you're saying, or?
You need to have the breadth of recording equipment that will go beyond human voice boundaries.
Okay.
I don't care what it is. And the stuff you buy at Walmart or Office Depot is not going to cut it. You're going to have to go to a Guitar Center, somewhere like that, to get the equipment to record it.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit more in depth afterwards.
I'll tell you more about it later. I'm not going to give out all the freebies here, but I've told people about it, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're right." As soon as I tell them, and Will the same thing. Will's like, "Oh yeah, I got one of those. I can do that." You can't use your cell phone or any of that because it just doesn't have the capability. And trust me, I've tried. And the rock concert that I recorded, when I did it on my flip video, which they don't make anymore, was 130 decibels, 125 feet from the stage.
Can I ask who it was?
Well, I don't know if you're into heavy metal, but...
Heavy metal, yeah.
All right, it was Motorhead.
Okay.
And well, they're no longer around because their lead singer died a few years ago, 3 years ago. So for years, they were considered the loudest band in the world. I've recorded several shows on the proper equipment. And I don't know if anybody knows what 130 decibels sounds like, but I had earplugs in and my ears were still ringing. So.
Yeah, 130 dB, that's louder than I think a jet aircraft.
Yep. And I've seen a bunch of times. I've recorded a lot of concerts. And it's one of those things, that's where I learned how to do this and get the voice right, because I remember trying to tell somebody that was new into the business that now thinks they're an expert. But they were new into the business then, and I tried to tell them, I said, when you hear one of these things scream from a couple of 100 yards away from you, it will literally frighten you to your core. It is so loud and so intense that
you can't imagine it unless you actually experience it.
You can't. And I had it happen a couple of times, and it was like, what was your T-shirt you were going to make? Clean wear?
Oh, the underwear changing moment. I can't relate it. I've been as close as maybe 100 yards to one of these things when they let loose like that, and it's incredible. There's nothing to compare it to.
No, it's almost like a gunshot going off 10 feet from you, literally.
Yeah.
And they're 100 or so yards away, and they're screaming at the top of their lungs for close to a minute, and you're like, and it goes from deep to high end. Mm-hmm. When they tail off, it's really high, and you're like, how in the, oh my God. I remember one time I was in my truck when I heard it, and I took Will to where this happened, and I started my truck, and I drove out of there at like 65 miles an hour because I was scared to death. This thing just bellowed this thing out, and I was like, oh my God, how in the world, I had all these things going through my mind. I started my truck and fled. I'll admit it, I fled. And I remember getting home and I was thinking, oh, Jesus. And then when I tried to record one myself, and so I'll tell you this right now, I'm not into plaster casting footprints or recording audio or anything, but I seriously wished I had some equipment with me that day when that thing ripped that one out, because it was deafening.
That's interesting that you say that, because my wife and I've told this a couple times to Will, we were up in the Three Sisters wilderness area at a lake, and it's late in the afternoon, but the sun was still up, and we heard this screaming, and I was quite a ways. I had many, many yards. It was 30, 40, maybe 70 yards from my wife. So I'd just gone kind of on my own little hike around the lake, and I started to hear this, and it'd start exactly like I said. It started low, and I went, and it would go up and up, and the duration was 25 or 30 seconds, 35 seconds or more for each scream, but it must have been so far away because it was pretty faint. It would only come in when the wind would get these little thermals coming in, and you'd hear it on the thermals. And I looked on the map, and probably 2 or 3 miles away from the direction it came was the lava beds. I'm like, well, I know it's not in the lava beds. There's no reason to be there to hurt your feet, and so it was just really strange.
And see, that's the key. If you thought it was 2 or 3 miles away, or 4, it may have been 10.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah, it may have been really far away.
I told a story to Will the last time that he and I talked on the show. There's two areas where I used to get two groups that would come out of the high mountains. They would be at 8,000 feet or so, and they would drop down into the valley around 5,000 feet. And I heard what I call barks. And a lot of people call them different things. They're short, intense, wah! You know, but extremely loud. You can hear them from easily a couple of miles away, especially up there. You know how quiet it gets up there at night.
Yeah.
When you hear those, it's like, okay, you know, so I'm kind of focused, and I just happened to be kind of in between these two groups. They weren't close to me. They were several miles away on either side as they were coming out of the mountains at night. But they were doing these short, intense screams that I call barks, back and forth, and it wasn't pleasant. You could tell that there was some animosity between these two groups, but they were probably, in all honesty, 8 or 10 miles apart. But they were coming out of the mountains late. It was 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and I'm hearing this, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really cool, you know, and I'm listening to this, and it's going back and forth. And then all of a sudden, from about 3,000 or 4,000 feet above me, in one of these deep canyons, I hear this scream just let loose. It was easily 3,000 or 4,000 feet above me in elevation in the mountains, up probably a tree line. And I hear this just scream, and everybody shut up. It was completely quiet after that, and I have no idea to this day how far away that scream was. I could hear it clearly. It wasn't intense and loud like the one I'd heard close by, like the one Will just talked about. But it was enough to let all of them know to shut up, that the big dog was here, and to let it go. And that's part of the thing that, you know, when you hear people, and I want to get this out there, when you hear people say that they know that they've seen the alpha, I've seen the alpha male, and I know it was the alpha male, that's a crock. Because out west here, the chances of you seeing an alpha are pretty much non-existent. Because if they're doing their job, if you think about all the other animals in the wilderness, the ones that have the most power are going to be the ones that are staying close to the kids, right, to their young. They're not going to let anything jeopardize it. But this one came out of this high mountain ravine and bellowed this out, and it shut all the rest of them up immediately.
They settled a dispute.
Never heard another. Yep.
See, and I've heard of this kind of encounters a few different times.
You know, it's funny. I grew up with 3 brothers. We had 4 brothers. It reminds me, you know, we'd get into a fight, like, or whatever, ruckus, boys do that, you know, Saturday morning. And then Dad would get up. All we had to do is hear the bed springs creak, and then we'd shut up.
Yep. And it's no difference with this. It's no different with wolves. Yep. When you think about wolves, there's the alpha, the pair of alphas, and then they start going down till you get to the omegas. The ones that are closest to you in the daytime are the omegas. The ones that are you don't see and hear are the alphas that are far away from the humans.
There's a command structure there.
Yeah, there is
just
a hierarchy.
Like everything else.
It's just like all primate groups. They all have their hierarchical, you know, everybody's got a place in the group.
Yep. And the chances of you seeing that alpha, if you see an alpha, it's by mistake. I can almost guarantee you that. I've seen huge footprints, but most of them fall in the range of 14 to 15, 16 inches, and I've seen them as big as 19.
And that's pretty typical.
Yep. You see a whole bunch in they may be 14 inches long, 14 and a half inches long, but the heels are 6.5, 7 inches wide, and things like that. So it's not a person that's just an ex-hippie wandering out in the woods with big feet. But it's one of those things, again, you got to apply common sense to it. If you had your children out in the woods and were surviving, you would be taking the risk and you would do everything you could to protect your children. And that's the same way it is with them.
I can hear Brian thinking, or Tom thinking, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Usually it's Brian. Brian's usually you can hear the wheels turning.
There's a lot to think about.
There is. There's a tremendous amount to think about.
I can tell you right now that if you apply common sense and your knowledge of the woods, I can tell you, well, let me clarify this right here and now. The reason why I don't help anyone anymore is because it always turns out to be bad. I will help people that have common sense. I've had I attempted to take some people out, that wanted to be out in the woods and go out with someone that had some experience. And, they wanted to have, some kind of interaction. I told them there's no guarantee of an interaction, because when you go out looking, you tend to not find them. You find them by accident a lot of the times. And when the places that I went to in the Central Cascades, I would go to areas, and I can tell you right now, and for certain, every time I went to several of these areas, I could find footprints. Now, they may be a week old, 10 days old, or from the night before. So they're always out there. They're always out there moving around. You may not see or hear them, but you can find evidence that they were around, right? And these two areas, mainly, that I went to, I don't think there was ever a time where I didn't find footprints. But now you have to back up, because just because you find footprints and you're out there some night doesn't mean that you'll hear them or even know that they're there. And I can tell you this because on one instance, I have a very particular thing I do when I go out into the woods. And I leave a little something halfway between where I am and my vehicle. And I leave it so it's readily visible. And so I can very easily find my truck if I have to get back to my truck quickly. And Will knows what this is, so Will, please don't tell anybody. But I've said it before in a recording, but it was a while ago. Mm-hmm. I have this habit of doing it, and I do it on purpose, right? Because when you get a little rattled, it's very easy to get, oh God, And so I remember one night I went out, and I wasn't out there long. I was only out there for maybe 3.5 hours. It started getting cold. I was tired. It was boring. I didn't hear anything. So I got up and I started walking back towards my truck, and I was looking for my quote trail marker, and it was gone. And I was like, damn, I know I left it right here, and it was gone. So I made it back to my truck, went home, went to bed. About 10:30 or 11 in the morning, I went back out. It was like a Saturday or a Sunday. I went back and I found my quote trail marker about 70 yards away, torn apart. Oh. And never heard it, never saw it, never knew it was there. And so, and this trail marker is now 7 feet off the ground. It wasn't, sitting on the ground. It was where I could see it easily with eyesight and my little flashlight that I had. And so there's things like that that'll happen. And there's other things that'll happen where you go out and spend literally 3 weeks in an area and don't hear or see anything, but you'll come back, the next day or something like that and see footprints. It happens. And then, of course, you go out sometimes and you can hear them moving all through the forest for an hour till they move past you. So, like I said, I don't want to see them. I don't want them close to me. That's not my goal. I want to know why they're moving and where they're moving to understand how they differ from us, and to get a, I heard somebody on another show, somebody sent me a link one time, months ago. Well, we want to know what these things do, and we're serious investigators, and we're this and we're that, and we want to know what they eat and how they move, where they move. And I'm thinking to myself, geez, common sense. We need food, water, and shelter in that order, right? Because they can probably go a day or two without water like us. So food's foremost. Second is water and some kind of shelter, some place where they can feel safe like we do in our homes. And you've got people out that claim to be experts that don't know any of that, that don't understand the basics of it. And that's the scary part, because those are the ones that are telling people what to do when they don't understand themselves.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, see, that's the whole thing about this program, Creek Devil, Will, you, is bringing common sense to this topic rather than all the other weird stuff that you hear out there. Because in the lack of, for lack of true information, for a lack of evidence, people's imaginations go wild, I think. And that's why
I can tell, Tom, I can tell you mine's done it. When you're out there, even when I've been out there with someone else or a couple of other people, it's easy for your mind to get away from you. When you start hearing things you can't explain, the whole thing about, I heard a twig break. There must be a squatch in these woods. It's like, wait a minute. You just heard a branch fall from a tree, but they jump to conclusions. It's easy to do. And why that's easy for people to do is people are afraid of the dark. And when they go out there with headlamps on and all they can see is 10 feet and it kills their vision beyond that.
Yeah.
That stuff happens all the time. And I don't know how many YouTube videos I've seen with these people with these headlamps on, wondering, every little noise, they start jumping and, twitching around. And, if you stay calm and quiet, it's I don't know. And a lot of that has to do with people being afraid of the dark, period.
And sometimes weird things happen. If you remember when you and I were driving up, looking at your old property and stuff, there was a turkey on the road, and it was strange. A stick I'm pretty sure came flying out of the brush and hit your truck. We stopped, we searched, didn't see anything, didn't find anything. But you can't just jump to the conclusion that was a Sasquatch. But there was no way of knowing what it was.
The funny thing is that stick hit my truck very hard.
It did. It was a weird situation.
And I'm up there explaining, and we're at this place where I'm explaining to Will as we're driving. This is where I heard the big screams several times, not just once or twice, several times. We're at the top of this ridge at about 5,500 or 6,000 feet on the coast of Northwest California. And I'm explaining to Will what would take place up here. And we're driving along, and arguably what would be the tallest tree in the world is up there. And Will can even tell you this tree is enormous. It's bigger around at the base than my truck. And I had a 4-door Dodge Ram. But a logger during the 80s, or late 80s, 90s, when they had the, snow owl, what was it? What was the stupid owl thing?
Spotted owl.
Spotted owl. Okay, when they had the spotted owl thing, a logger went out there and cut the top 40 feet of this tree off. But I'm telling you, when you sit, Will, was that tree ginormous?
It was a big one.
It would have been the tallest tree in the world had this logger not cut the top off it. And he did it because of the spotted owl thing. So we're driving up there and we're driving around and literally, I don't know, my truck is, my Dodge truck was 19 feet long, quad cab, Dodge Ram. And you could park it at the base of this tree and the tree was still wider than the truck. That's how big this tree was. So we're driving up on this road and all of a sudden there is this huge bang. Oh, my neighbor's dog's going off. So there's this huge bang of this branch hitting my truck. And we stop and we get out and we're looking around. There's nothing around, but it didn't fall or we would have seen it.
Yeah, it hit the side of the truck.
Yeah, it hit the side of the truck. And we're out a long ways from any house.
Now, the only thing that was interesting, too, was not that far away, we did find fresh evidence down in that partial creek, you know, where the finger marks are in the mud.
Oh.
But, you know, so, I mean, there was fresh evidence in the area of Sasquatches being there.
Oh. Will found a lot of evidence there. I was a bit nervous that day as well.
Yeah, you were kind of shook up.
Yeah, I hadn't been there in a long time. And I took Will up there, and one of the things that happened when we got there, Will, within a very short period of time, started finding evidence, both at the creek, the broken tree, the oak tree. Remember that?
Right, by your old house?
Yep, right by my old house. And I took him to my old house, and, you know, like I said, a lot of people lambast, I don't know, people go 20 years without seeing them once and you saw them several times. Well, they were outside my house. You know, some people can't grasp that when they come around your house. And like I said, there was a lot of things that I did wrong. And it had to do with that house and everything that happened there. So it's one of those things you learn as you go, but there are a lot of crazy things that happen when you're out in the woods.
Yeah, I think you have to just be a little selective and make sure that there's, you know, some kind of evidence that backs it up, you know.
Yeah.
I used to, Tom, I can tell you right now, prior to Will, I used to have a lot more instances that I thought were these things. And after I learned, and this is a long time ago, we're going back years, a long time ago, when I started working with Will and I had the ability to eliminate Will, and there's a couple other people that helped me as well, the Native American guy that I talked about, you start realizing I've eliminated 30 or 40% of what I thought was these things easily, 30 or 40%. Jettisoned it, got it out of my brain. Didn't happen. I thought it happened because of what I was seeing and hearing. And I think I'm going to talk about that Native American thing that we talked about before the call.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. That? And I was just thinking about the Stick Indians.
Oh, yeah. Right.
I'm going to talk about both. So I met very early on when I got into the subject, a Native American guy that a Fish and Wildlife agent turned me on to. The Fish and Wildlife agent had helped me out, or attempted to, where I lived at the time, because they thought it was a bear that was causing the problems, and it ended up not being a bear. And so the Fish and Wildlife agent gave me a name of a guy to go talk to on a small reservation about an hour and 15-minute drive from my house. So I went and saw this guy. And this guy, once he knew that I was sent there by the Fish and Wildlife agent, was much more willing to work with me than had I just shown up. And I don't blame him for that. Now, knowing what I know about this and the crazy-ass people that are in this, that will rob, steal, and take everybody's information and use it for themselves because everybody thinks they're going to be a YouTube expert or the next Kardashian. I don't even know why people watch the Kardashians. None of those stupid broads have ever done anything in their life. Their dad just represented O.J. Simpson. So, I don't know. Sorry, I got off on a tangent there. I was having a brain fart. So, I went up and saw this guy. This is 12, 13 years ago. I don't remember. He was in early 80s. And this guy was extremely honest and blunt. He was not one to talk. In fact, he told me at one time, about the second or third time I talked to him, he felt sorry for white people because they make up so much bullshit. And, you know, he was just he was kind, knowledgeable, spent his entire life out in the wilderness in this area where we lived, besides raising the crops that he needed to raise to feed his family. And so I'm talking with him, and I bought him coffee and lunch and breakfast. God, I don't know how many times. So I start talking to him, and he starts talking about what you had brought up a minute ago, Will, stick people. And so these Native Americans didn't have problems with white people. When white people showed up in 1850, 60, that area, when, you know, after the gold rush in California and stuff like that, they weren't combative with the white people. In fact, they did a lot of trading with them. And, you know, they weren't like the Plains Indians that wanted to go to war with everybody in 20 acres, right? They were just the opposite. They were not passive, but they weren't aggressive. And he told me all the stories about how his grandfather, who was the tribe leader, they had a different name for it, and I don't remember what it is. It wasn't chief, it was something else. Started working with the white men when they started showing up, and they realized that the redwoods, the trees themselves, would make them a fortune. And this is going back, you know, to 1880s, right? When gold didn't pan out in the area, they realized that fishing, which a lot of the Portuguese people that moved into the area, they went into fishing, a lot of them from the Azores and stuff like that. And he had all this stuff. He had all this history. He knew family names and stuff like that. And the rest of them went into logging the redwoods, because I don't know if anyone's ever seen a redwood tree. They're massive, huge, 300 feet tall, you know, big around as an average car at the bottom. They're just, I saw once a picture of one half of a redwood tree filled an entire logging truck. They had 3 pieces of the tree on a logging truck, and it was 115,000 pounds. And it was one half of the tree. That's how big these trees are. So they're over a football field tall, or they were back then. So he's telling me about all of this stuff that happened. And I told him, I said, look, I just need to know, you know, I kept going back to, I want to know what to do at my house. He kept going back to, this is what happens. You know, he was telling the story the way that he could, not the way I wanted. And I respect him for that now. But then all I wanted to know was how to get rid of these things. And he started talking about his grandfather in the 1880s and stuff, when more white men were coming into the area. And I don't mean white men derogatory. Please don't grind me on that. When people started coming in to harvest the timber and harvest the fishing, because this is on the north coast of California, they had, you know, their goal: fish and make money or log and make money. Gold didn't pan out in the area, so they started doing this. Well, they started trading with the Indians. And the funny thing is, the Native Americans in the area knew how to grow crops there, and the immigrants couldn't. They knew how to hunt proficiently. The immigrants couldn't. it was kind of a funny thing. And even coming down to fishing, you know, the natives could do it and the immigrants couldn't. So the trading all became around food and, you know, trading for weapons and guns and, you know, tools and American, you know, immigrant clothing and stuff like that. So if the natives didn't have to make something and they could get clothing that they could wear that lasted longer, they would trade for it. So one of the things that the natives had issues with over the years with these things was the fact that they would come in and around the Native Americans at times. The Native Americans didn't know what that time would be. So in the spring, when the Native Americans needed food and the immigrants needed food, the Native Americans would be out hunting for everything, deer, bear, grizzly, whatever it was. And in the fall, it would be fish, you know, and deer and elk and whatever was in the area at the time. So this trading taking place, what happened over a period of years is that more and more of the Native American men were gone for periods of time. One of these instances started with, you know, women being hassled when they were drying fish and stuff during the year. So the Native Americans had seen scarecrows and things like that from white people, and it wasn't necessarily from white people. They had seen things like that in areas in and around the county. So they started building what were called stick Indians. And they would just make a big cross, put buckskins on it, you know, put the dead head of a deer on it or whatever to make it look menacing against these things. And when that stopped working, because that worked for a while, right? That would stop these things from coming in and around the women when they were very few men around. They started building almost like structures because the Native Americans didn't build structures, but they had seen the immigrants build structures, right? So they started, you know, making what looked like a teepee and put stuff on the teepee to make it look like somebody was living there, even though they weren't. And these became known as stick Indians. And the Native Americans did that to throw these things off of where these people were actually at, because they moved a lot in that area, North Coast. They would move throughout what he would call the range during the seasons. In winter, they would move inland to a certain valley. They would plant crops there that they needed to eat, needed to feed themselves, and then they would move westerly towards summer and do the fishing and the hunting and follow the game and then come back. But they still had a core group in this valley, and I'm not going to name it, in Northwest California in this valley, and they still reside there to this day. So they started doing this. They called them stick Indians. They started building structures and things like that to make it look like there were more people around than what actually were, to scare these things off. And I told him, was it, you know, successful? What'd your grandfather tell you? And he said, well, it would work. One thing would work for a couple of years. And then they would realize that these things would figure out it's just, you know, BS. And so they would go to something else, but they always kept changing what they would do. And sometimes they would find what they built tore up. Sometimes it would not be tore up, and sometimes it just didn't work at all. And one of these instances in 1890s, you got to remember, this guy didn't look at years the way we do. He didn't have a calendar. He went by his age and spring, you know, summer, fall, winter type of thing. 1890s somewhere. They had a woman that was drying fish. Well, they had several women and the younger boys drying fish on a rock. And they would dry the fish on the rock, you know, all day. They would lay these fish out and then they would move it when they needed to, right, for food later. One of these women was attacked by one of these. And she was attacked pretty bad. From my understanding of what he said, she was, she had broken bones. She was beat up pretty good. And this thing was trying to drag her off. But she had a sharpened piece of wood that she was using for drying this fish. What she was using it for, I don't know. But it was sharpened almost like a knife. And it was a piece of wood. And she was stabbing this thing with it, or attacking it with it. And the thing dropped her in the river, and she was able to crawl to shore. So one of the other women went back to the main camp, got the men that were there, got them all ramped up, said, this is what happened, this is where it was happened. And, 10, 12 guys showed up with rifles that they had traded for from the immigrants. And they went out into follow this tracks of this thing. And they followed it for a while, and they found it like 1.5 miles away, coming into a clearing. And this thing was walking away from him, but it wasn't running. It didn't act like it was scared, even though it had 10 or 12 people behind it. And he said his grandfather said it picked up speed, but it wasn't running. It was just moving quickly across this clearing. So that 10 or 12 guys that were there, I don't remember the exact number, opened fire. They fired 12 or 14 times. This thing fell to the ground. And they approached it. It wasn't dead. It was alive. He said it was a couple of feet taller than the tallest man there. That doesn't mean anything to me because I don't know who was the tallest man there, but he said it was a couple of feet, and he spread his hands. It looked like 2 feet. And this thing was far from dead. It was injured. It couldn't get up. It was rolling around trying to get up on all fours or on 2 feet, and it couldn't do it. They had hit it 6 or 7 times out of the 12 or 14 times that they shot. And one of the elders with his grandfather and another guy went up, and they each shot it once or shot it twice together in a certain part of their body, and the thing just basically laid there and bled out. And I haven't told this because, first of all, it's a difficult thing to prove. And I'm not going to drag that old guy in here to get his voice, to please some whiny little boy sleeping in his grandmother's basement, drinking Mountain Dew or Red Bull. But the thing is, there's a lot of misconceptions out there that these things can't be killed. And the Native Americans have been doing it with spears, pikes, whatever you want to call them, bows and arrows, going back hundreds of years. And, one of those things is that when they killed it, it was like they just, we just killed something that was going to harm us, and they left. It wasn't a big deal for them. It wasn't this traumatic moment that everybody talks about. If you killed one, but he also said that he told me about a specific valley, and I told Will exactly where this is at, and Will understands why it is significant. He said, you never go into that valley at night, ever. Ever. And he was adamant about it. And when you look at it, and Will's looked at it on Google Maps and the satellite version and other things, Will, can you explain to him why you don't want to go into that valley at night?
Well, from like a military standpoint, you'd be in a very big disadvantage from all angles.
And what else?
Well, I don't want to give away too much.
There are things from Google Maps and satellite that you can see about this area, literally from Google Maps. And see, that's what people, they think, oh, these things are secretive. There's only 1 or 2 here or there. And this area, sorry, Tom, that question for Will was kind of to put an exclamation point on what we talked about earlier. Right? Yeah. So when you see this, there are very specific things, even from Google Maps, that you can see.
Oh, yeah.
Especially this light.
The features
and it doesn't matter
unique.
what part. Yes. Very. Extremely unique. And the funny thing is, all you have to do is know what you're looking for. And when I heard this Native American tell me this about all of the things that they did, you know, the fact that his grandfather, they killed these things with spears or pikes and bows and arrows. And it's very different from what you hear about the military stuff, because the militaries, if they can send an aircraft carrier and blow your ass up, they will do it. They're not going to send.
And you have to think about how men were in the past versus how they are today. You know, humans didn't get to be where we are by being the way we are today. We were extremely, you know, vicious, very, I would say when fighting, much more animalistic than we are today.
Well, tell them about that instance in Southern Oregon back in, what was it? The turn of the last century? All those...
about the miners having their heads taken off?
Yeah.
Yeah, that, in a nutshell, that was... you know, there were a group of miners, I can't remember, 3 or 4 of them, and, you know, one time passers-by, you know, talked to them and everything. The next time, or the next group that came through found them with their heads all taken off.
And that's the one down by Brookings, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And that's still an active area when you go...
Very much so.
Yeah, all the way, that whole corridor, because I think that connects up to the Siskiyous, which gets you, you can get on up in the Cascades.
You get up that whole Port Orford area, that whole region.
Oh, yeah, and that whole region, you know, it's funny because my wife and I drove down there. I got a friend of mine that lives in Crescent City, and we drove down there on Memorial Day, which is the busiest day of the year, and we drove for 3 hours, and we saw, I think we'd see a car about once every 35, 45 minutes.
Yeah, once you head away from the coast, there's really nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
It's a beautiful drive, though. God,
it's
beautiful.
It is.
And it's desolate country. I appreciate that. I like that.
Listen, fellas, we're kind of running short on time. I don't know what else you want to cover.
You have any other questions, Tom?
Well, that was the big one, was the, the Stick Indians. So that's a fascinating story. I'm just wondering if we could do that today and detour them, or even for...
Well, it's like anything else. It worked for them for a short time, and then they had to move to something else.
Yeah.
And it's like with anything, you can deter a deer from eating your flower garden for one season, but what's going to happen the next season? It's like anything else. They learn, we learn, they progress, we progress.
Yeah.
What was the line from Jurassic Park? Nature finds a way.
Yeah.
That's it.
Or life finds a way.
And the funny thing is, last year I only went out 3 times, and mostly because I didn't like the changes that I was seeing when I went out the year before, because it almost seemed like every time that I went out the year before, things were different, literally every time. And I by myself couldn't keep up with it, so I stopped going. Last year I went out with 3 times. Will knows about all 3 of those times. One of them wasn't good. The other 2 were okay. But it's one of those things where you have to pick and choose where you're going to do this. And if you don't know how to pick and choose properly, and you don't understand how to act in the woods, it can bite you in the butt.
And I think most people just use a shotgun approach because they don't know.
Well, and when I say bite you in the butt, I mean literally. Literally,
correct.
Yeah. If you go out there and you make a mistake,
you're going to be a sack lunch.
It's, yep, sack lunch. I like when I first heard you say that, I laughed my ass off. But it's like I was telling Tom, don't be afraid to go into the woods. I'm not.
And it's only because I am going to be prepared. Period.
Yeah, well, and that makes sense, being prepared. And part of that preparation, in my book, is having a better understanding of these things. Because, you know what, I would like to separate times. I don't really want to go looking and seeing one of these things. I wouldn't mind seeing one from 150 yards away on the other side of a valley. Okay,
that's what everybody wants.
that's there you go. That's me. But when I go out camping, my wife and I, we love camping and our friends and stuff. I want it to be us. And I'd like to do everything I can to mitigate any experience with these things out there. So that's why I appreciate this, Lee, learning what I can do to avoid.
I will close out with something that I wasn't going to talk about. But I will explain in as short as I can. How much time we have, Will?
Oh, go ahead and take your time.
So I have recently, in the last 6 months, been brought up to speed on something that happened in the late 1800s and early 1900s in British Columbia. And this is what I mean about being prepared. So there were a group of men that would meet up every season in British Columbia to trap and hunt, going for bear skins, deer, whatever, trap whatever they could. And these group of men would vary from, 8 or 10 of them to 12 or 14 of them, but they wouldn't allow anyone to go with them that they didn't know, because trapping actually was a dangerous job back then, because trappers would be shot and killed. Nobody would ever find them. Their traps would disappear, their skins would disappear, and these guys would disappear. So these guys had set up a camp in British Columbia, and they made a lot of money off of the gold rush in the late 1800s in Alaska, because people were buying skins to use as clothing and bedding and things like that. So these guys made a lot of money. And Will and I talked about this. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police literally made these people that were going up into this gold rush in southern, or the Yukon, we'll call it the Yukon. They would make them take so many months of supplies with them. They would force them to do it. They couldn't go up there. They would literally stop these guys and would not allow them to go up unless they had enough provisions to survive during the summer, because they couldn't go find all these idiots if they went missing. So these guys were basically cashing in off that, and they made a lot of money, and they built a small camp next to a river, and they built a little shed, I guess, to store their flour and their beans and things like that they needed to eat, as well as the pelts after the pelts got treated. These guys went up there. Now, these are hardcore guys that are used to being alone in the wilderness all summer. And they started running into problems. And the problems that they ran into had to do with the fact that these things started coming around because they had flour and beans. They had a food source.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so these things started coming around. Well, these guys with 45 70s and big bore lever guns and other weapons, all the way up through almost World War I, they started getting so scared when there'd be 8, 10, 12 of these guys in this camp at one time. Others would be out doing their trap lines and things like that, that they actually started building fires. And I'm not talking about small fires. They had this shed, which had a canvas roof on it. And they had their tents that they would sleep in. And they would kind of pool their food and resources and stuff, so they would all eat the same dinner and breakfast and so on. These things started coming around so frequently that these hardcore in the woods people literally would start fires that were 8 or 10 feet in diameter on 4 sides of their camp, because the only thing that kept these things out of the camp at night was the fires. And these are guys armed with, I don't care if you don't know what a gun is, a 45-70.
Oh yeah,
it is a big ass gun.
Yeah, that's a government 570. Yeah, the big guns.
Yep. And these guys, some of them were armed with that, some were armed with other calibers, but they were scared to death and stayed in a certain area because of these things surrounding their camp at night. And this went on off and on for several years. And to think of guys like that having to go to extremes to make sure that nothing happened. When you go out, it's no different now. You're not going to run into big. When you think about BC back then, there was literally not a lot of people up there. But if you go out into the woods now, you just have to be prepared. And I tell people, along with the stuff I told you earlier, right? The blinking flashlight, have a flare gun. You know, if you're close to a water source, fire it off. Make sure you don't start a forest fire with it. But have a flare gun. You know, have things like that, because when you draw attention to yourself and you're with your wife or your buddy and you guys are out there wanting to fish and hunt and do all the stuff, you go out and do it. Just be smart. Always use common sense. If something doesn't fit, if you go up there and all of a sudden you realize that, you know what, this is a little odd. Let's go to the other side of the lake, you know, or let's go to the river. You know, you don't have to stay there. If it doesn't feel right, move.
Yeah.
Don't wait for, don't wait for something to happen, but also be prepared if it does. And you'll be fine. Like I said, I would take my daughter out right now. I have no qualms about doing it, but then I'm a certain type of individual. I have a line, you cross my line, and I'm going to react. And I don't care if you're a human or a bear. You know, you can kill a black bear with a 9mm. You can't kill one of these things with a 9. But, you know, it's just being prepared for the situation that you're in, which is why I always take multiple weapons. And I always have all these other things. Bear spray stuff is great. I've heard people tell me bear spray doesn't work on these. That's horse pucky. You put cayenne pepper spray in anybody's eyes, I don't care who they are. They're going to react.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And we love to, like I said, like go camping, and it's this knowledge, awareness that I didn't have before of these creatures. So,
okay, so let me
2 years
tell you another thing to do. If you're camping by a lake or a river, you have water close by, don't start one fire, start 2 small ones. Now, the same thing the fire does for you, meaning is you can't see beyond it, works for them. They can't see beyond it. So instead of starting a big fire right there and putting your chairs all around it where you can't see anything, start one on each side of you. Small one. Get rocks, build a big thing, you know, make sure you have a way if the fire gets out of hand, but don't make big fires, just make 2 small ones. That'll help.
That's a good idea. I was always under the idea that if we started a fire, I wanted the one that could be seen from outer space, but
well, you don't want to
kill my fire when I go camping.
You don't want to kill your vision.
No. Yeah.
And see, that's the thing. I've done that before, and that's worked. But I could only do it in certain areas. If you get too deep in the woods, too far away from a water source where you can't, if something gets out of hand.
We always have a fire extinguisher anyway, or 2 of them.
There you go.
Got to do it. You just, you know.
So if you arrange your chairs in a horseshoe, right?
Yep.
One behind one person, one behind the other, just small ones, just twigs, no big logs. Just keep it going with small, brush and stuff that you can collect during the day, and you'll be fine. I've done that I don't know how many times, and it works well. And you can sit out and you may hear them and not see them, but the point is you're not putting yourself in a situation that becomes detrimental.
Yeah. So you feel the fire is a bit of a deterrent towards them.
Oh, it is.
Okay.
Straight up.
And the other one that Will said, as far as a deterrent, was smoking. Now, I don't smoke, but I could probably pick up cigars, or vapes.
They're mesmerized by smoke.
Yeah.
If they see smoke coming out of your mouth, they don't understand why.
Yeah.
It screws them up.
It will monkey with them mentally like you would not believe.
Well, see, that's why we'll take my 23-year-old granddaughter camping, because she loves her vape. Yeah, what can you say?
Well, listen, fellas, we need to wrap it up. Lee, any final thoughts?
Well, I just want to tell everyone, enjoy yourself in the woods. It's all good. Nothing will happen to you, especially the mama's boys sitting in grandma's basement drinking Red Bull, thinking that they're experts. Have fun.
And don't become a sack lunch.
Yeah.
Well, we're definitely...
Maybe they'll win our award.
We'll definitely have you back, Lee, of course. Tom, great questions, buddy. It
was this is a real good show. It's different, and I really appreciate it. Thanks a bunch, both of you guys.
And everybody stay tuned for the next segment.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.